The Royal Guard is one of the most famous symbols of Britain's power and history. For centuries, these guards have stood tall at the gates of the royal palaces, watching over the monarchy with unwavering focus. Their role is more than just ceremonial. They are highly trained soldiers, skilled in discipline, strength, and the ability to remain calm no matter what happens around them. The sight of these guards, standing perfectly still for hours in their iconic red uniforms and tall black hats, is one that has captured the attention of people worldwide. But there is much more to their job than what meets the eye. Sergeant Lawson, a Royal Guard with years of experience, is the perfect example of what it means to be part of this esteemed group. Standing watch at Buckingham Palace, one of the most well-known landmarks in London, Lawson knows his duty is not just about protecting the royal family, but also about upholding a tradition that has lasted for centuries. Every step, every movement, and every glance is part of the training he has undergone, and it is expected that he performs these duties with the utmost precision. The life of a royal guard is not as glamorous as many might think. While tourists gather around the palace, snapping photos and admiring the ceremony, the guards are often standing in silence for long stretches of time, under the blazing sun or in cold, rainy weather. But what stands out about Sergeant Lawson and his colleagues is their ability to remain utterly still and focused, despite the constant distractions around them. They are trained to ignore the noise, the excitement, and even the prying eyes of curious onlookers. Their job is to remain alert at all times, prepared for any situation that might arise. It is hard for most people to understand the mental and physical discipline it takes to do this job. Imagine standing perfectly still for hours, without showing even the slightest hint of movement. The guards are not allowed to smile, laugh, or even blink too frequently. Their eyes may scan the surroundings, but they must do so with precision and control. Any movement that could be seen as a distraction or a lapse in their duty is considered unacceptable. And yet, this is the life they lead every day. But despite the seriousness of their role, the guards often face playful challenges from the public. Tourists, eager to get a reaction out of them, sometimes approach the guards with the intention of seeing if they can make them break their stoic expressions. Some try to get the guard to smile. Others attempt to pull silly faces in front of them, and a few even wave their hands or shout. But the Royal Guard's response is always the same. They remain unfazed. To them, this is just another day on duty, and nothing will cause them to lose their composure. There is one particular moment during Sergeant Lawson's shift that stands out. A group of tourists, excited by the energy of the crowd and the grandeur of Buckingham Palace, decides to have some fun at the expense of the guards. They start by taking photos, making sure to get as close as possible to the sentinels. But soon, their curiosity turns into something more mischievous. One of the tourists, a young man named Dave, walks up to the guard and makes an exaggerated face. He sticks out his tongue and crosses his eyes, hoping to get a response. The other tourists laugh, thinking it's all in good fun. But Sergeant Lawson doesn't budge. His gaze stays fixed on the horizon, as if the group didn't even exist. This only encourages them further. "Come on. Aren't you going to laugh?" Dave says, his voice full of playful challenge. But there is no response from Lawson. The crowd around them starts to giggle, their amusement growing as they continue to watch the guard's unblinking stare. A few of them take out their phones, filming the entire scene, eager to show the world how they managed to make the Royal Guard crack. But all they see is a man who has mastered the art of remaining still, a living monument to dedication and discipline. The tourists start to get more creative. One of them, a woman named Rachel, decides to wave a bright red scarf in front of the guard's face, hoping to get him to flinch. But Lawson doesn't even acknowledge the fabric swaying in front of his eyes. Instead, he stands tall, his body stiff with precision, his face an unmovable mask. The woman waves it closer and closer, and still, the guard does not react. The crowd's laughter grows louder, but it only serves to remind Lawson of his duty. No matter how close they come, no matter how much they try to provoke him, he remains in his place. Other tourists join in, trying their own methods of distracting the guards. Some walk right up to them and try to make direct eye contact, as if daring them to acknowledge their presence. Others shout in playful voices, as though they are calling to a friend. But all of these attempts fail. The guards are trained to ignore such distractions, and they do so with remarkable skill. No matter what antics the crowd pulls, Sergeant Lawson never wavers. This behavior has become all too common for the Royal Guard. While most people respect the tradition and the professionalism of the guards, there are always a few who think of them as part of a tourist attraction. The public seems to believe that because the guards stand still and do not engage, they are somehow fair game for any kind of joke or trick. But what they fail to understand is that the guards are not simply standing there for decoration. They are part of an important system of security that has been in place for centuries. The Royal Guard is an elite force that protects the royal family, as well as the many important buildings and landmarks around London. They are trained to respond to threats and to keep watch over the most important parts of the country's history. Every member of the Royal Guard undergoes intense physical and mental training to prepare for this role. It is a job that requires constant focus, mental toughness, and a sense of duty that goes beyond personal comfort. They are not simply standing there as part of a show, they are performing a crucial service that demands respect. For Sergeant Lawson, the idea of respect is something that runs deep. It's not just about his role as a guard, it's about the entire tradition of the Royal Guard and what it represents. The uniform he wears, the weapons he carries, and the unwavering discipline with which he performs his duties are all symbols of something much bigger than himself. It is the embodiment of a centuries-old tradition that continues to hold significance today. The public, no matter how well-meaning, often forgets the seriousness behind the uniform and the responsibilities it carries. As the day goes on, the tourists eventually grow tired of their game. They wander off, laughing among themselves, leaving Sergeant Lawson to continue his duty as though nothing ever happened. They might walk away with a few photos and videos to share, but they will never fully understand the true nature of the Royal Guard. To them, it was all just a bit of fun. But for Sergeant Lawson, it was just another day of remaining vigilant, standing tall, and preserving the dignity of an institution that has stood the test of time. And so, the scene fades as Sergeant Lawson remains at his post, unwavering, unaffected by the mockery or the playful taunts. For him, there is no room for distraction. His mind is focused, his stance perfect, and his commitment to duty unshakable. No matter what happens around him, he is a sentinel, a symbol of strength, tradition, and the silent power that comes with true discipline. The Royal Guard is a symbol of British tradition, power, and respect. For most people, seeing these stoic soldiers at their posts is an exciting experience. Some visitors are respectful, acknowledging the importance of the guards as they stand at attention, silently protecting the royal palaces. But for others, the sight of these silent sentinels is too tempting to resist. It's almost as if the stillness of the guards invites a challenge. Some tourists can't help but try to break their silence, testing the guards' patience and pushing boundaries just to see if they can get a reaction. Among the tourists who are most curious about these challenges is a young woman named Jenny. She has always been fascinated by the Royal Guard. Growing up in a small town, she never imagined she would one day stand in front of these famous soldiers at Buckingham Palace. But when she and her friends finally made the trip to London, Jenny couldn't contain her excitement. She had seen the guards in movies, documentaries, and social media posts. The idea that these men were not only protecting the monarchy but were also part of a centuries-old tradition made her want to see it for herself. However, what she didn't understand was the level of respect and discipline that these guards had earned. Jenny's excitement grew as she stood in front of the famous palace, the iconic red uniforms and black hats of the royal guard standing like statues. The guards were silent and unmoving, just like she had seen in the photos. But instead of feeling awe and admiration, she felt a rush of curiosity. How long can they stand like this? She wondered. And more importantly, what would happen if I did something to make them react? Her friends, equally intrigued, were quick to join in. They saw the guards as part of the show, a part of the experience of visiting a royal palace. Some of Jenny's friends started to giggle as they tried to take pictures, snapping photos of themselves standing next to the guards. But Jenny had something else in mind. She decided to test the guards' composure, to see if she could get them to do something, anything that might break the intense silence. Jenny wasn't the type to cause trouble, but she couldn't resist. She had always enjoyed a good laugh, and the challenge of getting a response from a royal guard seemed too good to pass up. With her phone in hand, she began walking around one of the guards. She stood in front of him, raised her phone to take a selfie, and pulled the most ridiculous face she could think of. Her goal wasn't to be disrespectful, but to see if she could make the guard laugh, or at least make him show some sign of life. The guard stood perfectly still. His eyes did not blink. His face remained unchanged. Jenny took a step closer, raising her phone even higher and making another silly face. This time, sticking out her tongue. She smiled mischievously, waiting for the guard to react. But nothing happened. The guard didn't flinch. His gaze was fixed straight ahead, and his posture was as perfect as ever. Her friends began to cheer her on. "Come on, Jenny. You can do it. Make him smile," they encouraged. Jenny felt a rush of excitement. She moved closer, trying to get an even more ridiculous photo. The guards around her remained as still and focused as ever, not showing even a hint of emotion. Jenny was determined to keep trying, thinking that maybe she just hadn't done enough to get a response. One of her friends, Dave, joined in. "Hey, Jenny, let's get him to react. Try something else," he called out. Jenny, more excited now than ever, looked around and saw a bright red scarf tied around her neck. An idea popped into her head, and she grinned. "What if I wave this right in front of his face?" she thought. "Surely that'll get him to blink, or maybe even step back." She walked up to the guard, holding the scarf in front of his face. She waved it in front of him, blocking his line of sight. The wind gently blew the scarf, causing it to flutter, but the guard did not react. He did not even shift his gaze. Jenny and her friends stood there in disbelief, watching the guard remain perfectly still, unaffected by the colorful piece of cloth swinging inches from his face. Jenny's excitement slowly began to turn into frustration. "Why won't he react?" she thought. "This is so boring." But as the minutes passed, she grew more determined. She continued to wave the scarf in front of the guard's face, her friends laughing and urging her to keep going. To them, it was a harmless joke. After all, it seemed impossible that someone could stand so still without even the slightest hint of movement. Jenny wasn't the only one. As more tourists gathered around, others began to take part in the antics. Some tourists attempted to get closer to the guards, hoping to snap the perfect photo of them, or to make a silly face or sound that would break the guard's stoic expression. Others waved hats, scarves, or even small flags. But despite all their attempts, the guards remained unshaken. They did not acknowledge the distractions, the mockery, or the interruptions. It wasn't long before more and more tourists noticed Jenny's boldness. Some, inspired by her attempts, joined in. A group of teenage boys started mimicking the actions of their older sister. They jumped in front of the guard, acting as though they were trying to challenge him. But every time, the guards stood motionless, like statues, showing no signs of emotion, even as the tourists became more playful in their actions. While Jenny and her friends thought they were just having fun, they began to notice a change in the atmosphere. The guard's presence was not one of amusement. It was one of calm professionalism. The longer the tourists continued their antics, the more the guards stood out as symbols of unwavering dedication. It wasn't just about following orders or standing still for a long time. The guards were representing something bigger, a piece of history, a deep tradition, and a sense of duty that stretched far beyond the surface of a silly game. Jenny and her friends, though still trying to get a reaction, started to feel a sense of respect for what they were seeing. They had come to London expecting a fun, carefree experience. But now they realized they were witnessing something more serious. The Royal Guard wasn't a sideshow. They were not performers meant to entertain. They were soldiers, representing a deep connection to the history and security of the royal family and the country. As Jenny and her friends moved to leave the area, they glanced back at the guard, who stood as still as he had when they first arrived. Jenny realized that despite all their efforts, the guard had never once flinched. There was something almost awe-inspiring about his ability to remain so focused, so disciplined. She had tried to test him, to provoke him, but all she had achieved was a deeper understanding of what it meant to be part of such a respected tradition. For Jenny, this experience was a lesson in respect. What had started as a playful attempt to make the guards break their composure had turned into something much more meaningful. She now realized that the Royal Guard was not something to mock or challenge. They were there for a purpose, representing something far greater than a fun moment in front of a palace. They stood as a reminder of tradition, discipline, and the dedication required to serve a country. Jenny, in that moment, felt a sense of gratitude for the Guard's service, and she vowed never again to see them as mere performers for entertainment. But for now, she would leave with her friends, a bit wiser and a little more respectful of the Royal Guard. Though their antics might have seemed harmless at first, they had gained a lesson that would stay with them forever. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm glow over Buckingham Palace. The excited buzz of the crowd still lingered, as tourists continued to marvel at the iconic sight. Jenny and her friends were still lingering near the Royal Guard, their earlier attempts to get a reaction still fresh in their minds. They had pushed the limits earlier, trying everything from making silly faces to waving scarves in front of the guards, and though their antics had not succeeded in provoking a response, the thrill of the challenge had only grown. Jenny, in particular, couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing out on something. She had expected the guards to react just a little bit. A blink, a glance, anything that would show they weren't as invincible as they seemed. The stoic silence of the guards intrigued her, and it sparked a feeling of defiance within her. Why don't they just move? Why? She thought. They can't be statues. They must have some kind of reaction, eventually. Right? Feeling emboldened by her earlier attempts, Jenny began to think that maybe there was a way to push things even further. She wanted to test how far she could go without the guard reacting. There was a sense of challenge in her mind, and she couldn't resist pushing her luck. Her friends had moved on, but Jenny remained fixated on the guard in front of her. Still standing perfectly still, his eyes fixed in the distance, his body as rigid as ever. The more Jenny watched, the more determined she became. Maybe if I just get a little closer, it'll do something, she thought. It wasn't that she wanted to be disrespectful. She just wanted to prove that they were human, just like anyone else, and that they couldn't possibly stand there without feeling something. As she took a few steps forward, she glanced around, checking to see if anyone was watching. The tourists nearby were either taking pictures or chatting among themselves, but no one seemed to be paying attention to her latest plan. She approached the guard slowly, her heart racing. She knew that what she was about to do was crossing a line, but she couldn't stop herself. The idea of testing her boundaries seemed too tempting to ignore. She stopped right in front of the guard, just inches away from his immobile figure. Her eyes locked with his, though she could tell that his expression hadn't changed. His eyes remained locked in the distance, unwavering. Jenny took a deep breath and leaned in slightly, trying to make herself as close as possible to his face, hoping that he would notice her presence. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the bustling crowd around them. The guard remained still. His uniform was as pristine as ever, and his face remained unreadable. Jenny felt a mixture of frustration and curiosity. She took another step forward, standing directly in front of him. She had crossed the line. She was now inside the space that most tourists respected. The invisible boundary that marked where the guard's authority ended and the personal space of the observer began. With a smirk on her face, Jenny raised her hand and waved it slowly in front of the guard's face, just inches from his eyes. She wanted to see if he would react, even if it was just a blink. Still, he did not move. There was no twitch in his eye, no hint of discomfort. His posture didn't shift. The air around them seemed to stand still, and Jenny could feel the tension in her chest. This was no longer just a game. This was a test of wills, and the guard was winning. But Jenny wasn't ready to give up just yet. She stepped closer, standing almost toe-to-toe with the guard. She reached out and gently tapped his shoulder. It was a soft tap, almost playful, but enough to break the silence between them. Still, no reaction, no movement. The guard stood there, as still and unblinking as ever. Jenny's pulse quickened. A small crowd had gathered around her again, some of them watching with curiosity, others with nervous anticipation. They were all waiting for the same thing, waiting to see if the guard would finally react. Jenny could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't care. Her focus was entirely on the soldier in front of her. She waited for a moment, her eyes trained on the guard's face, searching for any sign of movement. There was none. He was like a statue, unmoving and unshaken by her presence. She could feel the heat in her cheeks. There was something about this situation that made her uneasy. She had crossed a line, and she was now standing too close. The guard's silence was starting to feel oppressive. And yet, she couldn't pull herself away. At that moment, Sergeant Lawson, the more experienced guard, who had been observing from a distance, decided it was time to intervene. He had seen tourists cross the line before, but this time, something about Jenny's actions stood out. He could see her frustration, her determination to get a reaction, and he knew it was his responsibility to ensure that the guard's role was respected. With a single, precise step, Sergeant Lawson approached. His movements were calm, but decisive. As he reached Jenny's side, he placed a hand firmly on her shoulder, gently, but with enough force to guide her back. "Excuse me, miss," he said in a clear, calm voice. "Please move back." Jenny froze for a moment. The sound of his voice, so controlled and authoritative, snapped her out of her trance. The reality of what she had been doing hit her in an instant. She had pushed too far, and now there were consequences. The crowd, who had been watching in silence, murmured among themselves. They had witnessed the tension building between Jenny and the guard. And now, they could see the guard's authority in action. Jenny took a small step back, her face flushing with embarrassment. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. She had crossed a boundary, and she knew it. The excitement of the challenge had clouded her judgment, and now she realized how wrong she had been. The Royal Guard wasn't just a part of a tourist attraction, they were protectors, and their duty deserved respect. The uniform they wore represented something greater than any individual moment of amusement. Sergeant Lawson did not shout or make a scene. His response was simple and firm, ensuring that Jenny understood the gravity of the situation. He did not need to raise his voice to make his point. The weight of the tradition and the responsibility he carried spoke louder than anything else. Jenny, now standing a few feet away, realized just how deeply rooted the tradition of the Royal Guard was. She had thought she was playing a harmless game, but in reality, she had disrespected something much bigger than herself. The moment had passed, but the lesson Jenny learned stayed with her. She had pushed the limits and, in doing so, had come face to face with the seriousness of the Royal Guard's duty. It wasn't just about standing still for photos or making people laugh, it was about respect. Respect for the tradition, for the soldiers who served, and for the history that these men represented. As Jenny turned to walk away, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of shame and newfound respect. The playful game she had been so eager to win had left her with a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a royal guard. And from that moment on, she knew she would never again view the guards as just a part of the royal spectacle. They were men of duty, and they deserved nothing less than respect. The day had slowly turned into evening, and the bustling crowds around Buckingham Palace had begun to thin out. Jenny and her friends were walking away from the royal guard post, their previous excitement fading into a mix of uncertainty and discomfort. The earlier antics, which had seemed harmless at the time, now felt like a mistake. Jenny couldn't help but replay the scene in her head, over and over again. She had crossed a line, and though Sergeant Lawson's calm intervention had forced her to step back, it didn't erase the feeling of guilt that was creeping up on her. As the days went by, Jenny tried to push the event out of her mind. It was just a silly moment, she thought. After all, she had been just another tourist in a city full of people, each one eager to see the famous guards. But there was something about the way Sergeant Lawson had stepped in that lingered in her thoughts. It wasn't the harshness of his words that stuck with her. It was the quiet authority with which he had made her realize her mistake. For the first time, Jenny understood that the Royal Guard was not a spectacle for entertainment, but an institution that deserved respect. However, her personal reflection was interrupted by the waves of attention the incident began to gather online. Jenny, like many others in her age group, shared her experiences on social media, posting pictures and videos of her visit to London. She had posted a few pictures of herself with the guards, not thinking much of it. But one video from that day had found its way into the spotlight. The video, which had captured her standing right in front of one of the guards, waving a scarf in his face and tapping his shoulder, was now circulating across social media. At first, the reaction was mixed. Some people laughed at how bold Jenny had been. "She's brave for trying to get a reaction," one commenter wrote. "Who knew the guards were so serious?" Another commented. Jenny felt a small rush of satisfaction at the attention the video was getting. It was becoming popular, and people seemed to find it funny. In her mind, it wasn't a big deal. She was just another tourist having fun, right? But then the comments started to shift. The tone turned from playful amusement to something more critical. She crossed the line. "Those guards are not there for your entertainment," one comment read. Another said, "This is disrespectful to the Royal Guard. You're lucky nothing happened." Jenny's heart began to race as more and more people shared their disapproval. The video, which had originally been shared with a sense of excitement, was now attracting negative attention. As more and more people started watching, the reactions grew stronger. Jenny felt the weight of the criticism, but she didn't fully understand why so many people were upset. It wasn't long before Jenny realized that the backlash wasn't just coming from online strangers. Some of her friends, who had been with her on that day at Buckingham Palace, had started distancing themselves from her. They had been just as excited as she had been about poking fun at the guards, but now they were uncomfortable with how things had played out. They started to voice their concerns. "Jenny, maybe you took it too far. I didn't think they'd be that serious about it." One of her friends, Sarah, texted her, "It's one thing to laugh, but they really are serious soldiers." Jenny's stomach dropped as she read the message. She had known her actions were wrong at some level, but it hadn't hit her how much of an impact it had until now. The Royal Guard, for all their discipline and stoicism, were still people doing a job. They weren't just props for tourists to have fun with. She had crossed a boundary that she hadn't even realized existed. The idea of respect, which had felt so abstract when she was in front of the guard, now felt much more real. As the criticism grew, Jenny was confronted with something she hadn't expected: the legal consequences. It wasn't just people online who were upset. The authorities had taken notice as well. A formal letter arrived at Jenny's email inbox from the British Ministry of Defense, stating that her behavior in front of the royal guard had violated certain guidelines for public conduct. The letter explained that any disrespect shown to the guards, especially actions that could be seen as disruptive, were taken seriously. Though the letter did not mention any immediate legal action, it did warn her that such behavior could lead to consequences under the law. Jenny sat in stunned silence as she read the letter. She had never imagined that something so seemingly innocent could have led to this kind of attention. The last thing she ever wanted was to get into trouble, let alone face legal consequences. It felt like the whole experience had spiraled out of control. What started as a playful attempt to get a reaction from the guards had now turned into a public issue. And Jenny realized that her actions could have repercussions far beyond a few hurt feelings. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a message from her mother. "Jenny, I just saw the news. What did you do in front of the royal guard?" her mother wrote. Jenny felt a wave of shame wash over her. She had always tried to make her family proud, but now, her actions were being talked about publicly. Her mother's message was filled with concern. "I understand you were excited, but you need to be more careful. That guard was doing his job, not standing there to be made fun of. Please, be careful next time." Jenny felt like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. She had let a simple moment of curiosity turn into something much bigger than she had anticipated. Her actions had caught the attention of not just strangers on the internet, but of people she cared about, including her family and friends. She had failed to recognize the significance of the royal guard's role, and now it was clear how important it was to show respect for the tradition they represented. With a heavy heart, Jenny decided to publicly apologize. She recorded a video explaining what had happened, admitting that she had been wrong in her actions. She expressed her regret for disrespecting the royal guard, and she apologized to anyone who had been offended by her behavior. It wasn't an easy decision, but she knew it was the right one. The video was posted online, and though some of the negative comments remained, Jenny felt a sense of relief that she was taking responsibility for what had happened. Over the next few weeks, the situation slowly began to fade from the public eye. The story of Jenny's antics in front of the royal guard became just another internet controversy, and the attention gradually shifted to other stories. However, the lesson Jenny learned stayed with her. It was no longer just about making a silly joke at someone else's expense. It was about understanding the value of respect. The royal guard wasn't just a tourist attraction. They were an important part of the country's history, and their work deserved recognition and admiration. As time passed, Jenny began to look at the world around her in a new way. She had learned the hard way that there were certain boundaries that shouldn't be crossed, especially when it came to matters of tradition and respect. Her experience with the royal guard had taught her more about the importance of understanding the roles others play in society, and it had reminded her that some things should never be taken lightly. She would never forget the way Sergeant Lawson had stepped in that day, his quiet authority reminding her that respect wasn't something to be taken for granted. And though the consequences of her actions had been difficult, Jenny knew that they had led her to a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly appreciate the role that people like the Royal Guard play in the world. By the time Jenny returned to London again, she walked past the palace with a new sense of respect. The guards stood as still as ever, their postures perfect and unyielding. But now, Jenny didn't just see them as part of the show. She saw them as what they truly were: dedicated men who represented a deep and rich history, and she admired them for it. It had been several months since Jenny's encounter with the Royal Guard, and though life had moved on, the lessons she learned that day stayed with her. The incident had changed her in ways she hadn't expected. It wasn't just about the social media backlash or the public apology she had made. It was about how her actions had made her reflect on respect, discipline, and the importance of understanding the roles that others play in society. The whole experience had opened her eyes to a world she had never fully appreciated before. Jenny had always been the kind of person who liked to have fun, who could laugh and joke around with her friends without thinking too much about the consequences. But that day at Buckingham Palace had shown her that some things weren't just for fun. Some things carried a weight of tradition, responsibility, and history. The royal guard wasn't there to entertain her or anyone else. They were there to protect, to uphold centuries of tradition, and to show the world what it meant to serve with dignity. As Jenny moved forward in her life, she couldn't help but feel grateful for the lessons that had come from her mistake. She had learned the value of responsibility, not just for her actions, but for how she viewed the world around her. The world didn't revolve around her own amusement, and she couldn't treat everything and everyone as if they were there for her entertainment. This was a lesson she had learned the hard way, but it was one that would stay with her for a lifetime. One day, Jenny found herself back in London. It was a business trip this time, not a vacation. But she couldn't help but revisit Buckingham Palace. The grand building, with its golden gates and towering walls, had once been the site of her mistake. And now, standing in front of it once again, Jenny felt a sense of reflection. She wasn't the same person who had once foolishly tried to get a reaction from the royal guard. She had grown, learned, and understood the true meaning of respect. As she stood in front of the gates, she noticed the familiar figures of the guards standing at their posts. Their faces were as serious as ever, their postures perfect, their movements precise. Jenny paused, this time not with a feeling of excitement or curiosity, but with admiration. The same men she had once tried to provoke were now symbols of something much bigger, something that represented centuries of history, the strength of tradition, and the dedication required to uphold such an important duty. She watched the guards for a while, taking in their stillness and their professionalism. The longer she stood there, the more she realized how much they represented. It wasn't just about the job they were doing in that moment. It was about the history that had shaped their role and the responsibility that came with it. Jenny could now see beyond the uniform and the rigid stance. She saw the commitment, the pride, and the honor that came with being part of the royal guard. These men were a part of something far bigger than themselves, and they took their duty seriously. Jenny had learned, through her own mistake, that respect wasn't something that could be earned through tricks or games. It was something that had to be given freely, without expectation of a return. Respect was earned through hard work, dedication, and an understanding of the value that others brought to the world. The royal guard, though silent in their work, were not to be underestimated. They were a living testament to the strength of tradition and the importance of maintaining discipline. As Jenny stood there, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw that it was a message from Sarah, one of the friends who had been with her that day. "I've been thinking about that day a lot." The message read, "I feel like we learned a lot from it. I just wanted to say thank you for taking responsibility and apologizing. It made me think too. I've always admired how dedicated the guards are, but that day, I didn't really understand what they represented. I think I do now." Jenny smiled as she read the message. She knew Sarah had felt uncomfortable with what had happened. But this message showed her that her friend had come to understand, just as Jenny had. It wasn't about pointing fingers or blaming anyone. It was about growing from the experience and learning how to respect the things that deserved respect. And that included the royal guard. Jenny thought back to the public apology she had made, the video she had posted, and the words she had spoken. It had been difficult, but she knew it had been necessary. She had learned that sometimes making things right meant admitting when you were wrong and showing others that you had learned from your mistakes. That wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. In doing so, she had shown others that she had grown, and she had restored her own sense of pride and integrity. The sound of a bell ringing nearby brought Jenny back to the present. The crowds around Buckingham Palace had started to gather again, taking photos and admiring the royal building. She felt a sense of calm as she watched the tourists, many of them unaware of the story she had experienced there. For them, the guards were just part of the tourist experience. But for Jenny, they were something more. They were a reminder of the importance of respect the value of tradition, and the lessons that could be learned from even the simplest moments. As she stood there, watching the guards in their usual stillness, Jenny realized something important. She had been part of something bigger than herself, a story that wasn't just about her. It was about the Royal Guard, about tradition, about duty, and about respect. And though she had made a mistake, that mistake had led her to a deeper understanding of these values. Later that day, Jenny sat down at a cafe near the palace. She pulled out her notebook, something she hadn't used in a while, and began writing. She didn't know exactly what she was going to say yet, but she felt the need to put her thoughts down. She wrote about her experience, about the lessons she had learned, and about how she now saw the world differently. Writing helped her process everything, and it felt like the right way to close the chapter on that part of her journey. By the time she finished, Jenny felt a sense of peace. She had learned that respecting others, especially those who represent something important, was not just about following rules. It was about understanding the value that others bring to the world. And sometimes, it took a mistake to help you see that. As she walked away from Buckingham Palace, Jenny glanced back one last time at the Royal Guard. They were still standing at attention, as they always had, with the same sense of pride and dedication. She no longer saw them as figures to be challenged or provoked. Instead, she saw them as a symbol of what it meant to serve with honor. And she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lesson they had unknowingly taught her. She understood now, more than ever, that respect is not something that can be earned through games or tricks. It's something that must be given freely and honestly to everyone, without exception.